Welcome to the Ancestral Healing Summit, a free online event where you'll learn from top experts about connecting with your ancestors to heal your lineages and transform your life. Share this powerful program with your friends and family, and come join us on Facebook at The Shift Network. And now your host, Lisa Bonis.
Welcome to this session of the Ancestral Healing Summit with my guest, Taya Shere. Our topic for this session is Jewish Ancestral Healing, Transforming Collective Trauma and Rooting in Positive Resource. Taya Shere, also known as Taya Mâ, is a practitioner of both ancestral lineage healing and somatic experiencing, offering individual sessions, online courses, and in-person workshops specializing in transforming collective and intergenerational Jewish trauma. She's the co-founder of Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, co-author of the Hebrew Priestess, Ancient and New Paths of Jewish Women's Spiritual Leadership, and she's on faculty at Star King School for the Ministry at the Graduate Theological Union, where she trains emergent clergy across faith traditions. Taya, it's such a pleasure to spend some time with you. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm so glad to be here, and I'd love to drop us in with an opening prayer.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
I invite all who are listening to come to a place of presence in your body as we drop in. Shekhinah, Adonai, thank you for these bodies, this breath, the miracle of this aliveness, and the opportunity to come together in this way. First peoples of the place where we each are, you whose bodies are this land and whose home is where we make our home, we give our great respect to you. More than human world, it is the web we weave inside of. It is such a gift to be your kin. Bright and benevolent ancestors, my own, who support me in my life and this work, the bright and benevolent ancestors of Lisa, and the bright and benevolent ancestors of all who are listening. Thank you for the ways you are a source of love, guidance, blessing, goodness, and healing. Thank you for leaning into our lives and to our time together this day, that it be clear, potent, sweet, and filled with greatest good. Amen.
All right, thank you. That was beautiful. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our conversation. We've got some great things to talk about. And I'm wondering if we can start out, can you take us with you on your journey toward ancestral healing? What exactly brought you to this work?
I love the question. All 8 of my great-grandparents fled pogroms in Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, the Ukraine, and arrived in the US in the early 1900s. And I heard their stories growing up, and even more than the stories I heard, there was the absence of what I heard. I yearned for more. I wanted to know more about where they came from, what the traditions were, and felt so deeply impacted by stories that I didn't even know. I felt them, the ones before them, even pulsing in my veins, and yet I didn't have the details, and I really wanted to know more. And I found myself in my own life highly impacted by intergenerational blessings and trauma. Particularly, my grandmothers were both such powerful women who brought amazing gifts and also had really hard lives in certain ways. And I found myself in my own life really carrying forward their gifts and also carrying forth what didn't go well for them. And I saw myself again and again replaying patterns that didn't work, and I yearned to fix them through my own actions, and I yearned to fix them by trying to heal them up directly. And even though so many things in my life were going so well, these patterns just kept pulling at me. And I wondered how to heal them. And in my own journey of trauma healing, I first came to the work of somatic experiencing, a body awareness-based trauma healing modality that teaches us that trauma doesn't heal by giving attention to what is fragmented, by giving attention to what is broken, but rather heals by building positive resource in the body and in our community and family systems. And I found this to be so impactful in my own life. I applied it personally. I trained up as a practitioner. I worked with it in communities toward healing collective Jewish PTSD. And I found that rooting in positive resource is such a potent way to heal. And yet in my family system and my ancestral lineages, I was still stuck in what was hard. And I encountered the model of ancestral medicine, the work of my dear colleague, friend, and teacher, Daniel Four, and learned a way of working with ancestral lineages that maps very closely onto what I already know about how to heal trauma in the body. That when we set boundaries with the troubled dead, with the pockets of trauma, and work to connect with positive resource in our lives, to connect with bright and benevolent ancestors as a source of blessing in our own lives, we can build relationships with them. And that in itself is amazing for what it is. And also, we can ask them to bring healing down through the line, to bring healing generation by generation, segment by segment, that they are actually highly impactful at working with the troubled dead. And I found in my own life that instead of wrestling with what was hard in my lineages, I instead could connect with a source of deep blessing if I turned my attention back toward ancients and feel that goodness in my own life and also get help healing what was troubled. And so that work has been so impactful for me. And it's gone in tandem with my work around reconnecting with Jewish spiritual traditions. I've really felt a deep call. I was raised in a Reformed Jewish community and in a Jewish family that really valued Jewish cultural identity and some layer of Jewish spiritual practice, the high holidays, Passover, Hanukkah, things like this, but without really a deep observance, and came later in life to fall in love with the tradition of my people. And it wasn't an easy journey. I went far and wide as a teenager, and as a young adult, I was deeply resistant to the patriarchy, the hierarchy, the disembodiment, the disconnection from earth that I experienced in Jewish tradition and Jewish spiritual practice, really what I was handed in my mainstream Jewish education. I hadn't known that there are deep teachings of earth reverence, of following the moon and loving the body right at home in Jewish spiritual tradition. And once I knew what was sacred to me, which I found on my journeys in nature and far and wide, I knew what to look for inside of Jewish contexts. And when I found them, I was just so deeply nourished to find that depth of meaning in my own tradition. And I made it a core part of my life's work to help others engage with Jewish practices of attending to the sacred that are resonant and supportive and feel deeply meaningful now. And so these paths have really woven together of my love for embodied earth honoring Jewish spiritual practice. That's a part of my path with Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, and just my daily practice and all of my life, and also this work of ancestral healing. I feel like my ancestors called me home to be working in this lineage, and it's a great joy and a blessing, and I feel so heartened and happy to sit with so many folks as they sit with their people to also find this positive resource and resonant ways for connection and healing.
Right. Wow. That sounds like just such a beautiful and rich path that you're on. And I so appreciate your sharing it with us. And I'm wondering, what's your understanding then of the collective Jewish trauma, and how do you suppose it helps the Jewish community and the culture and, well, even the world to do this work?
It's such a great question, Lisa. Collective Jewish PTSD has so many reverberations, and while it's most immediately visible kind of post-Holocaust in this most recent generations of trauma, it's actually a narrative that's been anchored into our tradition since the very beginning. There are stories of persecution and survival. There's a joke, I'm not sure its origin, but it's a common joke that in every Jewish holiday there's a moment where the story goes, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. And it's like, it's a pithy joke, but it says something about kind of the refrain of being persecuted and surviving. And that story of needing to work so hard, to be hypervigilant, to tend so carefully to survive, has really been etched into the cellular memory of the Jewish people. And that narrative has been anchored through many of our spiritual traditions, and I feel so blessed to be alive at a time now where we have kind of on a collective level, we're waking up to the possibility of not just being in a narrative of surviving, but really awakening to a possibility of thriving. And I feel like it's not unique to this place and time, but it is true that many folks in my community and extended community are really yearning for something different than the survival mindset. Really, it's time for, and it's possible for us to move out of that place of fight, flight, or freeze that gets anchored when the body or the community body is in a story of grasping to survive, and being not so far out, but a little bit far out from the Holocaust now. We're not the first generation, or some of us not even the second generation. We're able to really tend to embodied practice to healing up our nervous system, our personal, individual nervous systems, and also to work in our communities to build additional resilience and attend to vitality and to joy, and to not being only focused on what can we do to stay alive as a people and to keep our traditions alive, which is a real struggle and is important and serious. We wouldn't be here now if our people hadn't held on so strongly to these traditions. I have so much respect to the ones who've come before, and I feel so grateful to be gradually unfreezing our traditions, our community, our peoplehood. And it's so exciting to me to see what emerges out of that, out of a Jewish community that's excited about not only surviving, but thriving, and seeing, which for me, it also means a lessening of rigidity. It's like we don't have to hold the form as strong, but really can touch into the meaning and like what is at the essence of these practices, what is at the essence of what it means to us to be Jewish. Maybe we can play with it in new ways that are connected to the ancient paths, but aren't so fixed in the forms we've been handed. And so I'm excited to be in conversations with folks about what it means to be alive at a time in Jewish community where we don't only need to be focused on protecting ourselves, but we actually can live into a greater vitality. And I see it happening all across Jewish community, an attention to new ways of being around old stories, and an excitement around stepping with all of this in a new way.
Wow, that sounds just it sounds so exciting. I'm so happy that that's finally coming about. And I know that prayer is a way that you will work with this. But aside from prayer, what other Jewish ancestor reverence rituals do you actually work with?
It's such a great question. Prayer is an important one, and we can play with that perhaps later. And there also are ancestor reverence practices rooted in Jewish tradition that are more embodied in physical practice. I love to work with stones. Stones as a portal for connection with the sacred, and also as a tool for reverence and remembering. We see in Torah, in Genesis, a story of our patriarch Jacob, who lays his head down on a stone, and that stone becomes a portal of connection between the worlds. He receives the dream, the angels going up and down on the sulam. Some translate that as ladder. I see it as the spine. And the stone in this story is one example of a tool that helps us connect between the worlds. And in Jewish custom, across place and time, there's a tradition of stones as markers. We bring stones to the burial site of our beloved dead as a way of marking that someone is there tending that grave, and as a way of remembering. The stone is a tool of remembering our dead and can be a portal for connection. And so I really like to work with stones in communal prayer and personal prayer. Often if I'm leading a prayer service, I'll pass around a basket of stones and invite people to take a stone in their hand as they're praying the prayers of mourning. I invite folks who perhaps don't have capacity to pilgrimage to the grave sites of their beloved dead. Maybe they're too far away or they don't know where they are, to take a stone or a few stones and place them at a site in nature, either nearby or in their community, and to go there and tend it, to let the stone be a marker for them where they can connect to their ancestors. And I feel so grateful for the stone technologies in Jewish tradition. And there are other ones that are practices also of embodied remembrance. Really commonly held custom is on the yard site, the anniversary of the death of our beloved dead, to light a special candle, a memorial candle that's lit for 24, 25 hours. It stays lit to honor the memory of our beloved dead. And that flame is also an activator of connection with the sacred. And so we use stone, that earth energy. We use fire at the yahrzeit yearly remembrance, and also at the multiple times a year communal memorial prayers that are part of the pilgrimage festival. Also, there's a custom of hilulah, of festive pilgrimage to the gravesite of our beloved dead, or of tzaddikim, of righteous ones, of holy teachers and benevolent ancestors, where we're invited to, particularly on the anniversary of their death, but not only then, to visit their grave as also as a portal for connection. It's understood that the bones, and this is true, my understanding is this is true not only in Jewish tradition, but across many traditions, that the bones are really seen as the holder of the soul's essence. Even after one has died, that the essence of a person and their blessing and activation lives on where their bones are in the earth. And so we pilgrimage to the place where one's bones are resting as a way of coming close to them, of being in their blessing field. And then that practice is also such a powerful one of bringing ourselves physically to the place where the bones and that soul's essence still reside. And so these are all embodied practices that are simple in some ways and complex in others, but they're practices that I love to invite folks into who are wanting to connect with their beloved dead.
Wow, okay, great. So there's a lot of different ways that you can actually do this work. Now, on another subject entirely, you co-founded a school that ordains feminist Jewish clergy. So how does that connect to the topic of Jewish ancestral healing?
It's such a great question, Lisa. Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, which I co-founded about 13 years ago, is devoted to reclaiming embodied earth-honoring models of Jewish spiritual leadership from a feminist perspective. And in this work and in this way, we're up to remembering ancient ways that Jewish women were leading. Often in the Hebrew Bible, well, there are plenty of places where we don't see at all what women are up to. The stories have been erased. The places where we do see women leading, sometimes they're lifted up and other times they're denigrated. But we know when we hear these stories that women were up to these things in ancient times, and we're curious about them. We work particularly at depth with 13 archetypes of what we call priestess paths, archetypes of Jewish women's spiritual leadership. Some of them are more commonly known: the midwife, the mother, the prophetess. Others are lesser known: the mourning woman, the women who grieve on behalf of the community, the Ba'alat Ov, the shamanist, the one who connects with the dead. There's an amazing story about the witch of Endor, who the king comes to her. He, by the way, has outlawed the practice of anyone speaking to the dead, yet he's turned to all of his divination tools and other advisors, and he doesn't have the information and the support he needs as he's wondering about this war that's impending. And so he goes to the witch of Endor and asks her to contact the prophet Samuel on his behalf. And she's very hesitant because she's not supposed to do the thing, even though she does the thing. And yet she contacts the prophet Samuel, who's dead, for this king, for King Saul. And the message is not one that is, it doesn't have a positive outcome. It's not going to go well for him, what she sees, but she communicates it. And we see in this story, this witch of Endor, which means Endor, the well of generations. She's the one who communicates with the ancestors. And we see that even though this was a way of Jewish women's spiritual leadership that was perceived as witchcraft and was demonized or feared, it's a way that women were leading in ancient times. And we explore through text study and also embodied practice the various ways that we've seen Jewish women leading through practices in the ancient Near East and in ancient Jewish tradition. And we're curious about how these ways can inform us now and really invite us into models of leadership and practice now that are additionally resonant, additionally embodied, additionally earth honoring and connected to the seasons. And for me, these practices are exciting and new and ancient and deep and are connected to Jewish ancestral healing because they invite us to remember ways that have sometimes been obscured or lost. Many of us have received models of Jewish practice or spiritual leadership that fit into cookie cutter models, that the nuance in the old country and before that has been lost with migration and assimilation. And in Kohenet, it's been amazing to perceive the excitement about this work really, there's such a deep hunger for a revitalization and a remembering and an innovating. And for me, this work is deeply about ancestral healing for the ways that it also connects us to these lines archetypally, to remember this line of midwives that we can be connected to the lines of the prophetesses, and to be curious about that. And even though their stories have been erased, we can listen in and see what ways their stories might live on through us. And one more thing I'll say about this is, in Kohenet, we often work with Hebrew prayer in feminized Hebrew. So you may know that traditional Jewish liturgy is in Hebrew prayer that most often for God and for people is gendered masculine. Hebrew is a gendered language like so many others. And we're excited in Kohenet to pray in a way that's most resonant for us. And for me and many of my colleagues and playmates and students, this means praying to the sacred in a language that is feminized, and a personhood that speaks about me, not someone only in a male body. And so in our way of prayer, we work not exclusively, but often with feminized Hebrew. And there's something there that's really juicy and vibrant, and for me has become the norm. I'm often surprised when I hear traditional blessings because I forget that some people only pray in that way. But when I first was coming to feminized Hebrew as a way of prayer, it was so edgy for me, particularly because of what I wondered about in terms of my ancestors. For example, the Shema, which is the core prayer in Jewish tradition. It's our proclamation of our experience of the unity of Creator and creation. It's the prayer that many Jews say multiple times a day. It's asked to be the last prayer on our lips before we go to bed at night, and the last words on our lips in our lifetime. And this prayer, my experience is that my ancestors have prayed it and prayed it and prayed it a particular way for so many thousands of years. And yet, when I returned to Judaism and to prayer practice more in a more devoted way as an adult, what I found was that the language in the prayer didn't work for me. The masculine, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, the language of Lord, of masculine, wasn't what was resonant for my soul. And I didn't know what to do, because I felt it mattered so much to me to pray like my ancestors have prayed and to feel that resonance in my cells. And yet the words weren't my truth. And the words that were my truth, Shema Yisrael, Shechina, Lotenu Shechina Achat, praying to the feminine essence of divinity. And currently I pray in a less binary way. I don't experience God as much within gender. And at that time, rooting in specifically goddess language mattered so much to me. I wondered how I could do this and not really piss off my ancestors. And I was scared at first, and I didn't know what to do. And I just listened, and I was like in a conversation with my people, like, I want to pray in this way. I want to pray in your way. And this is what's true for me now. And so I remember the very first moment in synagogue when I prayed aloud in the feminine, this prayer, the Shema, and feeling just in tears so much yes and so much edge at the same time. And what I felt, the more I prayed this way, I found just such great joy at connecting to the ways my people have prayed, and also acceptance from them. Almost all of them just like thrilled that I'm praying in this way and happy that I'm doing it in a way that's right for me now. Like, what is relevant today? Let it be connected to what was, and let it also stay alive and have vitality. And so the way we pray in Kohenet is rooted in the ways of our ancestors, and also relevant and meaningful for our experience and practice today.
Wow, that's just a fantastic story. Thank you for that, because it just feels like they'd rather you connect in this way than not connect at all. And in fact, I'm curious, the story that you told, that was a very brave woman taking the king up on his request, because he could have had her put to death for breaking this law, first of all, and second of all, for giving him bad news. What ended up happening to her?
As far as we know, nothing bad happened to her. Bad things happened to him. It didn't go so well for him in terms of the war, but the story ends with this moment with her feeding him, and that's what we hear. There are various midrashes or other stories of what may have happened, but in the story we're given in the Hebrew Bible, this is what it is, and we're left with the mystery and the possibility of imagining her story. And I feel like some of us, because we don't have the words in that text, we get to imagine her story through our lives, through how we show up in this way of working.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Now, you did mention earlier that you've got some prayer songs that you'd like to share. So go ahead and tell us what your understanding of Jewish prayers of ancestor reverence and ancestral healing, and maybe share those prayers with us.
I love the invitation, Lisa. The first prayer that I feel called to share is really the central prayer in Jewish tradition for ancestor reverence. It's one that's known among Jews as the mourner's Kaddish. And it's a prayer in Aramaic, a sister language to Hebrew. And even though it's called the mourner's Kaddish and is said as a prayer of mourning, it actually says nothing about death, nothing about dying, nothing about grief. It's a prayer entirely praising the great name. And it's a prayer that we say on behalf of our beloved dead, as if they are saying the prayer where they are, as if they're saying it and in their merit, so they can receive the blessing, the benefit of having said this prayer. And so it's a prayer that we understand as a prayer of ancestralization, that when we say it on behalf of our people, our beloved dead, it helps them become more well where they are. And I would love to offer this prayer here. Folks who wish to pray along or to listen might call into their heart or mind their beloved dead as I recite the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, ba'alma divrach yirotei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon uvyom echon uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach, le'olam u'lalmei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal, Shemei de Kudasha, Mrichu, Le'ila min kol berchata v'shirata, Tush bechata v'nechamata, Damiran ba'alma, V'imru, Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min Shemaya, V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, Hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol Yishmael, V'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru, Amen. This prayer we recite on behalf of our beloved dead for their merits in the world to come, praising again and again and again the great name. This prayer of Jewish ancestor reverence is such a core one. And then there are other more esoteric prayers or less widely known prayers that also invoke, welcome, celebrate our ancestors. There's one that comes to mind that's a part of the Sukkot liturgy, which is a fall harvest festival in which we create temporary huts that help us remember the temporality of our own bodily home. And we welcome, it's a custom to welcome our ancestors into these Sukkot, into these huts. And there's a beautiful liturgy that I'll chant just a section from. This tune is by my dear collaborator, Ya'eli La. And the words are welcoming our beloved ancestors. Ulu ushpizi ilaim karishi. Ulu ushpizi ilaim karishi. Ulu imahata ila ata kirishata. Ulu imata ilata kirishata. Come, exalted mothers, holy mothers, our foremothers. Come, exalted fathers, our forefathers, holy fathers. Ulu ushpizi ilaim kadishi. Ulu ushpizi ilaim kadishi. We welcome our exalted holy foremothers, our bright and benevolent forefathers, to be a source of blessing, guidance, connection, and goodness in our lives. And we pray in this way, welcoming the goodness of our beloved dead and the bright and benevolent ancestors.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing those with us. What do you suppose your ancestors are thinking when they hear you leading these chants?
You know, Lisa, I feel them right with me. I feel them at my back, in my cells. Every so once in a while, I feel them dancing. If it's a rocking chant, I feel like my people experience the chants as like nourishment, as expressions of joy. It's in the way of ancestral lineage healing that I tend in the ancestral medicine model, we understand that we're each the living face of our lineages. And as the living ones, we have the unique opportunity in this moment to really revel in embodied presence. And also we have the oys as well as the joys of the embodied experience. But because we are the ones now who get to experience the pleasures of being in body, we get to eat and touch and dance and love and sing in this way. I feel like those offerings, the physical offerings, offerings of song and of dance and of foods, all of those, I feel like they bring such joy to my ancestors because of the ways that they're just proud of me and happy for me, but also because of the ways they nourish the line, that actually fully being in our bodies in pleasure and joy, in feeling, whatever the feeling, that's a unique gift that we who are alive at this time in these places that we have. And so for me, I'm a pleasure priestess. I love these bodies, and it feels like really being in the body and cultivating embodied presence is a way of honoring my ancestors, of honoring the unique gift that it is that I'm the one in my lines that is alive right here, right now.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way that you're looking at that. It makes me feel so alive just hearing you talking about us being the living face of our ancestors. That's a beautiful way to put that. Now, I know that you actually work with people with ancestral healing sessions. So what do you think is special about these sessions?
Wow, the ancestral lineage healing sessions are such a joy for me to get to hold for people. What I find is that it's so precious to be with people as they're with their people. For many folks, it may be 1,000, 2,000 years since anyone in their lineages has paid attention. Like, we may be calling on a bright and benevolent ancestral guide, and it may have been a really long time since anyone in their lines has been interested, has been tending. And so in this work, for me, there's a preciousness. I sit with so many people as they sit with their people. And I just feel the immense joy at getting to do that. And I also feel I hold all sorts of, I do session work and rituals of various kinds. And there's a unique strand in the ancestral lineage healing work where there's almost an effortlessness. Like, for me, when I'm showing up, I'm not doing the work. It's really the ancestors doing the work. And I find when I sit in session to connect with my people, it's similar. What I need to do is focus and tune in, but really the core of the work is making space for the ancestors to show up, to be of support, to be of guidance. And in my experience, they love being called on. And sometimes it takes building a muscle of connection, of like learning how to quiet the mind or the ideas or the judgments, because many of us have been entrained to the notion that we don't get to connect with our ancestors. Like, because of all of the many oppressive systems that have cut us off from our people, our stories, the lands where we're from, the idea that we can connect with our ancestors, that it's our birthright to have these connections, it's one that many of us haven't been exposed to before. And so it can often take an unentraining and a retraining to really build our muscles, to build our trust that this connection is entirely possible, that it is wanted, and that it's something that we have access to, that our ancestors want to play with us, and that it's our birthright to play with them too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So in your work, I imagine there must be common experiences that people have. Can you share some of those, and maybe even some uncommon things? Do you have any stories you want to tell?
What a great question. Well, yes. one common thing that I see again and again and again is folks thinking that there's no one out there for them, that like they come to this work yearning for an ancestral connection and like not actually expecting that it's going to happen. And not always, not across the board, it doesn't happen immediately always for everyone, but often with dedicated attention, it does happen. And often it happens a lot quicker than folks expect. And what I see when folks drop in to connect with a guide, there's just a sense of like such deep gratitude and relief when one shows up, that like, oh my goodness, there's this presence here that actually has been here that I didn't even know about. And it's really common once that connection is brought to the foreground to just see people welling up with the goodness of feeling that support, that deep holding that's behind them. And so that happens again and again and again. And I know for me, when I first approached this work, I was like, I had a question that's common among people that come to me of like, how do I know I'm not making it up? Or is this real? And Daniel Ford, the founder of the ancestral medicine model, says a thing that really resonates, that like believing in it doesn't actually matter. The question is like, is it positively impacting your life? Whether you believe in it or not, what is the impact? What is the effect? And for me, the question that I had, like, am I imagining it? Once I actually dropped in and connected with the lines, what I found is what I experienced was so far different than what I would have imagined. It was confirming for me. I was like, I couldn't have imagined that thing. What I would have created would have looked different. And I see it again and again where folks have things that like come that really surprise them. And other times things come that really are confirming for them. Maybe in their life, they've always loved roses. And when their ancestor comes, it's like, that's what their ancestor wants, is roses. And it's like, oh, we've already been doing this dance and I didn't even know it. Things like this. I'm also thinking of a story that connects perhaps more to the explicitly Jewish ancestral healing strand. I'm remembering a client who contacted me because he was going to visit Auschwitz with his father to bear witness there. And we sat in session and he made guide connection. And he heard, and this was someone who was Jewish by blood, by identity, but had no Jewish spiritual practice or Jewish spiritual education. And his guide said to him, you know, when you go to Auschwitz, it's really important that you offer this mourner's prayer. It's really important. And he didn't know any prayers. And so he asked me and we talked about it. And I said, well, ask your guide, is it this one? Is it this one? And then we found the one and the guide was like, it's that one. And so he went on this journey to Auschwitz with his father. And I had recorded the prayer for him and he played it in Auschwitz, this prayer, and made ritual and just spoke of the deep importance of bearing witness in that place and bringing the prayers and then the goodness that he felt rippling in his own line from that work. And often people who approach the ancestral healing work end up going on pilgrimages or doing elaborate rituals. And more often than that, people end up tending in the simplest ways, adding certain food to their dinner tables, adding, lighting Shabbat candles on an occasion, or adding a candle to their altar, making matzo ball soup, or making challah, or simply planting flowers in their garden, just listening to what their guides want. One of the things in this work is the homework that you have is not homework that I give you or the practitioner gives you, but the homework comes from your guide, from listening. And building a relationship with a guide is just like building a relationship with anyone. It's just about showing up, about being curious, about listening, about being in a relationship. And that we get to have that with our ancestors. For me, that experience and what I see again and again with my clients and my students is that cultivating greater connection and wellness in the ancestral body just has such impact on our own lives and also the health of our communities. In Kohenet, many of the students and the practitioners do this work, and the health of our community, the vibrance in our community, I've seen such a difference of if we're all the living face of our lineage, then when I'm sitting in circle with you, it's not only me and you in circle, it's me and my people in circle with you and your people. And so the more we're tending the wellness of our lineages, just the greater positive impact we can have together.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. That makes so much sense. And I can see how, as we were talking about earlier, how doing this work really does impact the entire world, because we are all connected at some level. So yes, the living face of our ancestors are meeting with all of them who are connected in some way. So yes, wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. May I speak into one thing about that? And this isn't unique to Jewish community, and I see it in Jewish community, is that because of the trauma and the ways we've been in survival mode and the disconnection from many of our traditions, it's left people yearning for connections to the sacred, and often journeying far and wide beyond Jewish spiritual practice to find meaning. And I'm so much in support of folks practicing what is most resonant for them, and also doing the work of ancestral healing with our own lines can really help us to have greater access to the goodness in our own traditions. So when we show up with that, we're more responsible in how we engage with other traditions. We're less likely to grab or to take or to need. And yes, to right cultural exchange and to resonant practices, but also having the possibility of being at home with the goodness, the wisdoms of our people, so that we can be additionally responsible as we're showing up in community and in the world.
Yes, perfect. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we go any further, I want to make sure that I give everybody the URL for your websites. You've got 3 of them. The first one is jewishancestralhealing.com. That's 3 words with no spaces, jewishancestralhealing.com. The next one is Taya.Mâ, Taya.Ma. That was a good find there. And then the next one is Kohenet.com. That's Kohenet.com. And since you have 3 different websites, would you tell us a little bit about what our viewers will find at each of them, and which would be the best way to connect with you regarding what we've been discussing today?
Wonderful. They can find me at any of the places, and at jewishancestralhealing.com specifically, they'll find online courses in Jewish ancestral healing, which include content on Jewish ancestor reverence practice, and also individualized work around ancestral healing, ancestral lineage healing from Jewish perspectives. We work with folks from many different lineages of all different backgrounds, and we have a particular focus in Jewish ancestral healing. So that you'll find there. At Taya.Ma, you'll find my goodness in the realm of other online course offerings. And so I teach online courses in embodied presence, in pleasure as prayer, and that's there along with my music. I have many albums, 4 albums of Hebrew goddess chant, percussive, sweetness, and also a couple of books that they'll find both on my website and at Kohenet.com. I'm co-author of The Hebrew Priestess, Ancient and New Visions of Jewish Women's Spiritual Leadership, as well as Sidor HaKohanot, a Hebrew Priestess prayer book. And Kohenet.com will also give you more about that movement. It's a clergy training program and a movement, and we're working to change the face of Jewish spiritual practice and spiritual leadership. And so at any of those places, they can find me, plus all sorts of other goodnesses.
All right, perfect. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Taya, for joining us today. This has been just a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate your time.
It's a great pleasure, Lisa. I'm so happy and heartened to be with you in this way.
All right. Well, once again, Taya Shere, thank you. And thank you to all of our viewers for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this session in the Ancestral Healing Summit.
Thank you for joining the Ancestral Healing Summit, brought to you by the Shift Network. To learn more, visit ancestralhealingsummit.com. To learn more about our global programs to support you in waking up in all the areas of your life and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. Thank you again for joining us and for sharing this empowering path of healing your lineages with your friends and family.